So let's see. So just quickly about 501 Commons. I'm 501 Commons is a capacity building nonprofit. We provide services across a spectrum of fundamental components of nonprofit and organizational capacity, including management consulting, technology, financial services, human resources, leadership development, et cetera, et cetera. If you are interested in support in these other areas, you can go to 501commons.org and get more information. My name is Graham Ford, and I'm the Director of Technology Services at 501 Commons. Our team does a variety of technology work, including database development, data assessment, IT services, and internet work. So we span breadth of sort of technology practice areas in which IT and security plays a role. So our agenda today, we're going to talk a little bit about security risks and sort of what the reality is. We're going to talk about data inventory, which is really important to all organizations, large and small, relative to security. We're going to talk about some new models for security, particularly zero trust. We'll touch on device management, and then talk a little bit about compliance in managing sort of compliance policies. So, and also, if you have any questions, please feel free to throw them into the question and answer section at any time, and I'll try to answer as we go through the presentation. So, what's the big deal? It seems obvious to ask about why we care about security, but I think it's important to give context to this conversation because there's a lot in this that will feel heavy and burdensome about security, and to understand why and what the problem is informs the decisions and approaches what we take in terms of securing information and technology systems. First of all, everyone is a target. This should be obvious to everyone at this stage, but this is not states, hackers hacking into state government organizations to steal information. Everyone is seen as a target, and a lot of the attacking that gets done from hackers is automated, meaning there are bots and software programs out there scanning the internet, trying to attack systems, sending out spam and phishing, and very sort of intelligent technology that attempts to take advantage of anyone. You don't have to do much to get be a target. Simply having sent emails and having a domain, having a website is enough to become a target. Nonprofits of all stripes are at risk of theft, vandalism, and major disruption. We see this all the time. This goes back to the first bullet point of everyone is a target. And the criminals don't care that you're a nonprofit. We see nonprofits hit with CryptoLocker viruses. You don't have to be in the news to be hit with crypto and ransomware. Theft of devices and laptops happen from, say an employee's car can have where they left a laptop. You can have a laptop stolen from there. So nonprofits are particularly at risk. In fact, I think in my experience, they're maybe seen as a particular target because they maybe are seen as not having as much capacity from a technology and security standpoint. So that makes them a risk. And nonprofits have money, just like businesses, for-profit businesses and individual persons, there's money and sort of opportunity there. Every user is a risk. So we used to think about firewalls and, someone coming in, trying to sort of hack into our system through a firewall like you might see in the movie. But the reality is that every user is a risk, including the trusted users. because, you know, everybody's reading email and browsing the internet, clicking links and opening documents that they get. And that makes everyone essentially a risk in their behaviors and what they do. And that's really, whether inadvertent or even sometimes intentional. Sometimes with you know, this goes to the next bullet point, HR, you know, like I'll say that poor security makes good HR difficult. You know, nonprofits, the majority of their resources goes to paying people, meaning we are people heavy in this sector. And, you know, as part of that, we need to have great HR processes and be able to, you know, managers need to be able to appropriately manage performance. We need to be able to bring people on efficiently and exit them efficiently in a way that protects the organization. If you have, for instance, a list of passwords that everybody knows that accesses all of the systems, it can hamper organizations in doing things like implementing performance improvement plans. Because if you have fear that the employee has so much power and access and knowledge, it will hamper your HR processes. And that's incredibly important to organizations to be able to effectively manage people. Nonprofits serve at-risk persons and trust their reputation with us. So, you know, if you think about that, and I'll touch on this a little bit later, but a lot of the information we store about the constituents we serve is sensitive. You know, the fact that a person maybe is seeking drug and alcohol counseling, or is looking for a loan, or needs food assistance, all of this information is particularly sensitive, especially nowadays with everything being online. We do not want to see our information, you know, especially when someone seeks out support and assistance, that getting on the internet, becoming searchable by Google is a significant issue. And so, you know, I care probably more, you know, we can probably care more about information security, about that kind of information than, for example, the transactions at a grocery store or other store. So, you know, to the extent that nonprofits are actually have a higher risk and higher duty to maintain security because of the sensitivity of information that they store. And, you know, the internet is accessible. I think that's my final point, is that there's just some really terrible people out there, and we can't disconnect from the internet, really. And so we have to understand there's just a terrible place, and there's a lot of terrible people that are trying to take advantage of the risks in our people, and, you know, frankly, just make money. So one of the first things that we really think about is our data. That is probably the most important asset that we care about from a security standpoint. Data is everything from the information about our constituents, information about our donors, it's back office data and such as payroll and direct deposit information. It is everything throughout that organization that we are managing and communicating and transmitting. So one of the best things an organization can do is do a data inventory. This lays the groundwork for all of your information security decisions and is really the input to any type of, you know, security assessment for the organization. So one of the first things you can do is just start going through all of like the files that you have, looking at, you know, things like constituent information, records, contracts, all of this stuff that you have, and categorizing it in a number of ways. I like to use this data exposure risk. So low business impact, medium business impact, and high business impact. LBI, MBI, HBI. 3 different classifications that you can use, any agency can use, that help you lump together data based upon the risk. And it's not, the way this classification is, I think you can, as an organization, a layperson, even a non-technical person, can understand what these definitions mean. Low business impact is public information. Low information if it's risk. It's already out there, probably. Maybe it's information on your website. If someone, if it got deleted, in some cases, maybe if it got deleted, it wouldn't be that big a deal. Or employee moves on and takes it with them and you can't get it back. No big deal. You might, in some cases want backups of it. So maybe the information on your website is LVI because it's public, but you want to make sure that there's backups of it. Medium business impact. So narrow reputational impact, moderate monetary cost if there was a exposure, and moderate to high opportunity cost. So opportunity cost meaning that when there's an intrusion or loss of information, that means that your staff are doing a lot of work to address the problem. And so, that's something that loss of work is probably the biggest thing, cost in some ways, in this middle box of MBI. And so, but we want to understand that maybe we have if there's an intrusion, you can say you lose one record for someone, you can tell them. They may not be happy, but there's relatively narrow, impact from a reputational standpoint. And then, the cost of addressing that, maybe you have to isolate or reformat a computer, but you don't have significant dollars lost in terms of addressing the results of an intrusion. Now, high business impact, this is the most important, obviously. So this could have significant reputational damage if it's this information is revealed or lost. For example, all of your donor data is revealed and is downloaded outside and gets published on the internet, or the database of the people that your organization serves. This could have significant and sort of organization-threatening level ramifications. It's significant costs, including attorneys and the labor required to address it and the costs of fixing the problem. This is the HBI is a high business impact data. This is the stuff that you're going to most guard. Now, for beyond understanding classifying the risk around the data, you need to consider storage method. So where is it? Is it on a server? Is it on SharePoint? Is it an email? Just defining where it is. Transit. Is it making sure you understand, do we have secure protocols like HTTPS that we use to access it, and that we're using patch servers. So if you have in-house servers, even if it's HTTPS that you see in a browser, doesn't mean it's absolutely secure, because there are different iterations of SSL and of HTTPS, and you want to make sure that you're using patch software that implements it in a secure fashion. Authentication requirements, or what's the password and multi-factor authentication around that data? Do you have specific requirements? For example, data that's covered by HIPAA might need two-factor authentication from a compliance standpoint. Who has access to that data? Defining restrictions on usage, like how in a way can it be shared? Who could that data be shared with? So there's policies around that. What the backups and business continuity plan is, or situation is for the data, and also ownership of the data. So a lot of organizations, particularly Best Starts for Kids grantees, or anyone who basically deals with the state or county, the government often views the data as their data. And so understanding if there is specific constraints or requirements around that data and defining it. That's important because often it's good to be able to keep that kind of data separate and or be able to, not necessarily separate from a storage standpoint, but separate from a tagging or in some kind of digital manner that could allow that data to be purged, reported on, secured differently, however it works out. But understanding ownership and sort of other ties of data is really important. So one of the best things that your organization can do around information security is inventorying your data and understanding it. This also, I'll say, has other impacts because it helps you clean things up. A lot of organizations have file shares that are just a mess. And do your data inventory and also clean up your data at the same time. It's also a good opportunity to apply a retention policy. So saying, okay, constituent information gets kept, donor information gets kept forever. Information that we provide services to, we have contracts that say it needs kept for 7 or 8 years. Financial data, 10 or 12. Whatever it is, use this data inventory as an opportunity to also consider your retention requirements. I'd probably just even add that another bullet point there at the bottom. So once you have that, you need to consider what your security model is for your organization. Now, the old way of security was to think about the walls around our garden. So you had, and that this is why we call it a firewall, because it protects our internal network from the outside. And, you had remote access, so you could get into the walled garden and through the gate to access the systems inside. This is frankly the old way. It doesn't work anymore because remember here, every user is a risk, including the trusted ones. So that means that the risks are already inside the walls of your garden. It means that, unless you're not going to interact externally, you're not going to get email, your walled garden doesn't matter, no matter how strong the walls are. And frankly, most nonprofits do not have the resources to create walls that are impenetrable and provide adequate security. So the newer way we think about security is zero trust. And what this means is that we are going to move the walls out away from the we're not going to guard the building. For example, if you take the building as the analogy, we are not going to protect the building and figure that anyone who gets in the building is okay. We're going to protect the specific files. So for example, to apply the analogy to say a doctor's office, I'm going to protect the file cabinet, and have rules for accessing the file cabinet and not the building itself. So with zero trust, we realize that the walls don't work. The devices accessing our systems can be anything. They can be corporate devices, bring your own device, personal devices. There's any number of ways of devices can be mobile devices, mobile phones, for example. So we want to treat all devices equal and move the security line back from the outside, from the firewall, into the data, closer to the data itself. And this goes back to, for instance, when you're doing this, because your security becomes specific to the data, that's where that data inventory that we did earlier comes into play. Because now we can define, we can say this data system and this data system need this level of security. This over here, it's LBI, we're not gonna really worry about it. So we're gonna make that easier to access and have less security around it. So zero trust depends upon having that kind of understanding of your world. We're gonna do things like advanced verification of identity. Passwords are not enough. Because with zero trust, it's not the fact that you need to understand and manage your identity and authenticate identity in a way that's reliable and secure, because that's what gets you into that information. Not, the fact that you're there or that you're on a computer that is inside the walls. You actually want to validate the person itself. You are going to validate devices for compliance in a zero trust scenario. So you're going to deploy, for example, things like mobile device management that makes sure that your computers have antivirus and are encrypted and password protected and all these things. Because you don't necessarily need to control or manage the device. You need to do some system for validating devices. Awareness of data sensitivity and risk. This goes back to the your data inventory and understanding what the information is. So in this new model, we have a security model that's actually specific to the different data. We also can use intelligent security systems for detecting risky behaviors or risky types of data. So for example, if you use Office 365 or other systems in SharePoint, you could have a system that identifies and finds bank account numbers and social security numbers or other numerical identifiers or other types of information and classifies them and says, hey, that data is secure. You can't just email that, without any kind of encryption. And so these systems are relatively easy to set up nowadays. They don't require a significant, sort of security like expert to implement, and this is the way through the world is going. So with zero trust, we classify our data, and we also use intelligent systems to help us identify problems, because just as the criminals use computers to attack us, we can use the computers and the smarts out there to protect ourselves. So I'm just going to give a moment. If anyone has any questions, please put those into the chat or the Q&A section, and I'll just give you a moment and then I can move on. Okay. Well, so a little bit about cloud systems, because we're all in, everyone wants to be in the cloud, and we're working remote, but sometimes there's concerns about, how do I trust this other organization? I need moving the data from my servers and to a cloud system that is somewhere else. I don't know where it is. I don't know who has access to it. What does that mean? Well, from my standpoint, cloud systems fast track to base stability and security. You get to outsource all of the risk and responsibility and get configurations that are designed and developed to be secure from the get-go for the most part. And that allows you to get to a standard of security without having the investment in your own systems. Office 365, Google, you just get stable and secure out of the box for in a large part, at least at some base level. You need to be prepared for monthly per user fees with these systems. Sometimes the free version doesn't include all the functionality in terms of security that you need. You'll need to pay for the extra functionality. A lot of times there's nonprofit discounts and it's cheaper, but you should pay a little bit more. That cost of paying for the extra security plan and features and functionality is going to be less than if you try to do this all yourself. And frankly, implementing of the appropriate security for on-premise systems is darn near impossible and infeasible for most organizations. And again, with the cloud, you're outsourcing responsibility and you're reducing the risk of catastrophic failures. Yes, cloud services go down occasionally. Sometimes you can't access it. Problems happen. But you're much less likely to experience the complete loss of your system or data, or have something that is out for weeks with the cloud. And frankly, then it also becomes someone else's problem when those issues happen. It's good. Now, it's also good to find a core central platform and add components selectively. So for a lot of organizations, this can be G Suite or Office 365, and you're going to use the majority of the functionality within that system. And then you're going to add on external components. Ideally, those are external components that integrate with those systems and can allow you to do things like manage authentication through the central system so that users don't have to be managing more passwords everywhere. They don't have to have 5 different multi-factor authentication systems in place, and that you can use all of the functionality and compliance tools that are built into those systems. So that's something important to understand, and view that central system not just as an easy suite that provides a bunch of functionality, but as more of a foundation of your cloud approach. And again, this goes for small and large organizations. Don't expect perfection. Sometimes things are, it's different when you're in the cloud versus on-premise. On-premise servers can have had a long history of tools and functionality that can make for seamless user experiences. Going to the cloud means learning new things. It also means using protocols that are designed to work over the internet. The protocols where a server, say, talks to a workstation on site everything's really fast, leading to sort of an immediacy to the experience of the user. So I save a file and it shows up there, and my colleague across the room immediately sees that file. It immediately sees that file to the server. Whereas when you save a file from, say, a workstation into a cloud system, it might have to sync up. And a few minutes later, that other user will then see it pop up, but it isn't there immediately. And so understanding what that, that cloud services are different is important to communicate. And last, always get a BAA. And this is an indication of a couple of things. For a BAA, a business associates agreement, tells you, it's basically a contract or a specification by a vendor that says, here's our commitment to you around compliance, around notification. We're going to tell you if we get hacked. We're going to tell you if there's a vulnerability and there's an issue. It's about ensuring that the organization will treat your information with care, and the BAA specifies how they're going to do that. If you're using a cloud system and it's got HBI or MBI, you should have a BAA on it. And if that provider can't provide you with a BAA, you probably shouldn't be using it for that kind of data. For example, Zoom, if you use Zoom for healthcare work, to get a BAA, you had to have a certain size of instance with them, certain number of users, of paid users and such things. So it's just not off the bat and not default that you get a BAA with a vendor. It also, sending that BAA with Zoom, for example, causes them to turn off certain functionality. So they don't do cloud recordings of meetings, because they don't want to store sensitive information on their server. So the BAA is an important part of cloud system security and implementation. So I've got a question here. Could you please give an example of the set of products that you might use? Yeah, well, I can talk to you about sort of one of the standards that 501 Commons has been implementing. We tend to view the Office 365 suite as preferable for zero trust and for a lot of this system. So an example would be with Microsoft using their Microsoft Business Premium licenses or E3 and Enterprise Mobility Suite licenses. You get access to Exchange Online and their compliance tools. You can use Microsoft Intune, which is a mobile device management system that allows you to manage mobile phones and Windows computers and Macs, and it gives you a nice sort of central suite to manage and control and restrict access to data. Office 365 also has something called conditional access, which allows you to control who has access to the data. So if there are files in SharePoint that have sensitive information, you can say, only let into Office access to those files from computers that meet certain requirements, like are encrypted and path coded. So that we do like the Intune MDM, like just for nonprofits, a nice affordable package put together. You know, especially if you're Windows 10, you can do Azure AD Join. So you log into your computer with your Office 365 credentials. You get your SharePoint file syncing up to your desktop, your personal files syncing to the cloud, and you can create a nice sort of zero trust scenario, system in a fairly easy and economical fashion. And if you're a BSK grantee and you want to do this stuff, 501 Commons can help you do that through the BSK capacity building funds. Google Suite's an interesting issue. Google's MDM and the functionality requires a lot of sort of the more enterprise licensing. So it's a little bit more complicated, and the nonprofit free instance of Google doesn't have as much of the functionality. I think with Google, you're often going to augment Google with other MDM systems and other sort of management systems, depending. You know, Google is more of a focus on, I think, in my experience, in schools and many than sort of nonprofits in terms of what they provide. So the Microsoft system is a little bit more comprehensive from a security standpoint and the functionality that they provide. I think a lot of this goes back to Microsoft's history of sort of in corporate environments and focus on security. So, you know, I see nothing wrong with the Google G Suite and the systems. And, you know, the nice thing is that for small organizations, G Suite can be a great fit because it's all web-based. It requires, it's at its basic level, it's fairly trivial for laypersons to manage it. But you need to make sure that there are certain things like multi-factor authentication is in place. And ideally, you're using a mobile device management system in addition to G Suite to ensure that devices are encrypted. Because as soon as you connect a device up to the suite, to the system, you know, your credentials are stored, and if that gets lost, you don't want that data accessed. So let's see, moving on. So what to avoid in the cloud? Consumer cloud products. So for example, I like to manage my, you know, well, consumer cloud products have significant issues around data ownership, support, account management, security policies and compliance, management enablement and scalability. They generally do not have a VAA. This means that if you have information and say like, and a consumer cloud product can include like personal Gmail accounts. I see those scattered around sometimes. Say a organization is using Office 365 and a user wants their own to use Gmail. And so they set up a Gmail account and they start using that for work and forwarding their work email to Gmail. These have real problems because when that person leaves your organization, you will have no way to get access to that mailbox and get that email. And your clients or your constituents are still going to email that Gmail account, most likely. There could be proprietary data in there or data about ongoing projects. And so that's a great example. That's something I see quite often, frankly. If you absolutely have to use Gmail in those cases, set up a separate G Suite instance just for your organization, even if you use Office 365. You really need to avoid entirely consumer cloud or personal account products. I would use these only for LBI type of data. So an example of that is personal productivity tools. So like, you know, Jane Program Manager needs some kind of tool that she likes to use her personal task management, her to-do or get things done process. It just has the things that she is going to do that day. And, you know, there's nothing, is, you know, check email, plan my calendar, do this and that. That's an example of something where Jane could go out and use, you know, whatever task management tool that she wanted to use for that purpose. And that's probably okay, as long as she's not doing things like putting constituent names down there. If the constituent name is called Johnny client at 5, and she puts Johnny's first and last name in there, that becomes an issue. Because just the knowledge of that name starts to that the first and last name of constituents could be treated as MBI or HBI data from a security and sort of privacy standpoint. You know, and then but that example of getting things done apps, it becomes a problem when they start scaling and you want to, for example, have shared task lists. Now you have Jane Program Manager who wants to share a to-do list with a colleague, and because they're not within the same system, it's a personal account, you start running into issues. So, you know, even where it seems innocuous, it can grow into a bigger problem. So you really want to be, frankly, aware of what's going on there. And then if there's any sharing between users, that's where you start saying, stop, we need a system that works for everyone in our organization. Password. So, okay, so moving on. One thing I want to talk about here is passwords and how standards have changed. At this point, everything we thought we knew was wrong. And we can thank NIST, the National Institute for Science and Technology, for coming to this conclusion. Basically, all that stuff that we're used to doing where we need to have numbers and symbols and capitals and, 16 characters led people to make bad passwords. I'm sure we all know the person who has their password written on the sticky, or they always use the same password and they only increment one character every time it expires. And what we found is that complexity and expiration actually makes security worse. You can guess what someone's password is just by the date, and maybe they rotated the password if you happen to know their password at any point. So we want to use long passwords like passphrases, like I like to eat shrimp and grits every Tuesday night. That's a good password because it's long, it's hard to guess. It's also memorable. So I, as a user, am going to remember that password. We don't want expiration because, frankly, you only want to change passwords when they are compromised, when we know that there's a problem and we need to change it. Otherwise, we want people to use long, good passwords, not rotating their passwords. Using multi-factor authentication really should become obligatory. This is having a phone or device that authenticates who we are, having something. This is like ATM cards and pins, really important. And in fact, nowadays you can, with like Office 365, you can do passwordless sign-on. So all you have to do is have your phone and be able to get into it and press a button to log into Office 365. You don't even need a password because we know that passwords are insecure. Having a phone is much more of a stronger sign in the physical presence than the knowledge of the password. And then if the phone is lost, you can reset the authenticator. The IT person or whoever resets authentication so that token, that key that the phone is no longer useful. The great thing about multi-factor authentication, it's like if the front door of your house had a different key for every person, and you could remotely change that key if it gets lost. So you can, so if your kid loses the key, no big deal. We electronically create them a new one, and that key is no longer good. That's how I like to think about multi-factor authentication. That's probably the single best way you can secure your systems. I'd also say that I do like password management systems for organizations. Sometimes there are shared passwords. And using something like, LastPass or I don't know, there's a myriad out there. I think there's some on TechSoup. Those are really important, and using a Teams version of a password management system can be really good and really powerful. Don't use spreadsheets for passwords. The great password managers help automatically generate passwords. A lot of them will detect hacked passwords because they scan the dark web and do a bunch of fancy things. So I do like them and recommend their use. That said, those generally should be, those stored passwords where they're shared should usually be for LBI information. When you have MBI and HBI information in particular, you want to pay attention to identity and be able to track who logged in. So you want to know that, Jack logged in at this time and Ahmad logged in at this time to the system. And if you don't have separate passwords and accounts that identify people, and you have just one password in the password manager, you don't have any way to have that audit information to understand what happened. And this goes back to treating, HR processes and dealing with performance and other issues. Because when there's disputes, for example, between people, you could have harassment accusations. And if you have shared passwords, that can create a real issue if there's, say, a harassment or accusation. So, for example, someone's accusing the other person of deleting their work or making a modification or spying on them or all sorts of crazy things that do happen in organizations. If you don't have good identity management and access management, you won't be able to get information to prove what's happening. And so that's, and take it from me, I have seen these issues come up in organizations we work with and have needed to track identity and track what's happened back to people to give the information they need to address issues. So this is a real problem. This is real to nonprofits. Okay, so moving on, we're going to talk a little bit about device management. So out with Active Directory, in with mobile device management. What this means is that our classic Active Directory on-premise system really, I think, is going away at some point. Cloud services and cloud systems, Azure Active Directory as part of Office 365 are really powerful and provide much more functionality. Active Directory just doesn't do well in a zero trust world. It's designed for the walled garden. Mobile device management is really the zero trust configuration model going forward. So I talked a little bit about this before, but MDMs allow you to can apply to org-owned or personal BYOD devices. So they can either be used to manage the phone or laptop that the organization deploys and provide sort of lockdown and deploy the specific software and configurations to a org device to make them that sort of cookie cutter workstation for someone. Or they can be deployed to a personal BYOD device, like a personal cell phone, to say, this device meets certain standards. This device has antivirus, or this device is locked and encrypted, whatever that minimum standard you want to apply to the personal device to allow it to do things like access email. MDMs worked with phones and laptops and desktop computers even. The mobile thing comes from the fact it's heritage for serving and managing laptops and, mobile phones, but really, it's just device management. And then, we allow evaluation of devices for compliance. So do they meet certain standards? Like we want to not let Windows 7 computers that shouldn't be on our systems anymore in. Oh, I went slide forward. Enforce configurations on devices. So like making sure that devices lock after a certain amount of time can be important, so they don't just sort of sit there unlocked. We can deploy applications. So maybe your organization uses certain types of timekeeping tools or applications or messaging tools or other things. You want to make sure that it's easy for staff to say install Teams on a personal phone or install their T-Sheets app. MDM can, like if you, for example, the Intune MDM device gives you a little a specialized store on the device that a user can go click and install the recommended apps by the organization. You can manage software updates. So if you're a larger organization, you deploy Intune. Microsoft you can really replace your WSF servers and do something different with Intune and that. And you can also remove data at separation. So the problem is, for example, if people have a personal cell phone out there, sometimes it's hard to remove, in certain cases, organizational data from the phone. A lot of sort of servers, especially Office, Exchange and Office 365, can wipe a device remotely, but they can't easily selectively remove corporate information from the device. And MDM is what enables usually the selective removal of data from personal devices. So that's really important, because if you're faced with a separation and someone's been using a personal device, how do you get corporate data off of it? Making sure that, I'll tell you a story. A couple of years ago, or 3 or 4 years ago, we had to let go an employee, and that employee had been using their personal computer for doing work. And this became known to me. And so I had no electronic means for removing the client data off of that person's computer. And so what we as an organization had to do was we provided a separation agreement with a payout that allowed us access to that computer and the ability to remove our data from it, which is what we did. And so the person brought in their computer and it's there while I went through it and removed the data. You don't want to have to do that. It's not scalable. It's not, frankly, that it's not perfect. You want to avoid that kind of thing. So using MDM is a lot better. So other steps to security. Using single sign-on to simplify management. That's really, I mentioned that before, using that sort of centralized system. So if you're in Office 365, you can, and you also use, say, Zoom, or you use other sort of like a database, like a Salesforce database, using SAML, single sign-on, SAML, or other kinds of single sign-on can be really important to simplify management. And that has the benefit that when you disable an account, like say an IT person gets an emergency email from a manager saying they had to fire someone or separate someone that afternoon, you're not tracking down the 15 places where that account is stored. You just need to disable it once or fewer places. And that can be really important in those scenarios, because anytime you're in, that means fewer steps and fewer opportunities for you to make mistakes. Encrypt computers. So making sure that those Windows computers, in particular on laptops, are using BitLocker, or that mobile devices like Android phones are encrypted, because some of those mobile devices are not encrypted by default. Beware of bring your own device in particular, especially with COVID and people working from home. Kids are using family computers more than ever today. My family had to basically cede our family laptop to my daughter for doing her Zoom camp this summer, Zoom or camps. And so BYOD devices, while you may be able to deploy mobile device management, you still don't know who's using that computer. Kids playing games and downloading who knows what, that's a real issue. So even with bring your own device, you need policies in place. You need to say, you can use a personal device, but you're the only person that knows the password and uses the password of the profile on it. If, for instance, someone has a home Mac and they have a kid that uses it for remote learning, they need to have a separate account and login for the kid. So these are things that are, you don't have technical measures to enforce it, but you need policies and training in place and require that. So BYOD is not great in my book. It's always better to provide an order-owned device if you can at all possible. I think that phones in BYOD are better than computers because in my experience, people treat phones frankly with more care than their computers, because it's all their pictures and texting. And, personally, the last thing I ever want is my kid to be touching my phone because who knows what they'll do. So I probably treat my phone with more care than my computer personally. And, so that's I think a better candidate for BYOD. Strengthen management processes and really integrate your tech processes with HR in particular. Also finance and other processes need significant integration. If there is a PIP, you need, for example, for an employee or performance issues, there needs to be an IT person that is consulted to make sure that there's policies and processes in place. For example, do you need to put litigation holds on a mailbox of a potentially disgruntled employee so that they can't delete email or delete files? What is in place to protect the organization? Integrating with HR and training technology as a trusted partner is really critical to sort of effective management, reducing risks. And that allows HR managers and people managers to be really effective and feel some security in the choices and the way they operate. It allows them to operate in a way that protects the organization and ideally helps make employees more successful because managers can be frank without sort of feeling the risk. Use automated data classification. I mentioned that earlier. You really need to regularly assess technology needs, inventory what applications are installed on computers, pay attention to your firewalls to see what websites are being accessed. You really need to eliminate shadow IT. IT that's disconnected from the organization loses control, and then you get things like personal Gmail accounts out there and real problems trying to bring things back into the fold. If you shadow IT will cause IT managers just to be seen as the enemy, and that can be a real problem. Ensure you're and understand your backup systems and your recovery strategy. Again, that's important. Have backups that are just separate, even offline from your regular backups. And then find friction that causes unsafe practices. I'm going to move on a little faster because we're almost out of time. But working remote, it's important to be aware of certain aspects of remote work, privacy, be able to have phone calls that family members are not overhearing. These are real issues that remote work is introducing. Especially increased electronic transmission of documents, for example, direct deposit forms. We've seen instances of fraud around direct deposit where someone submits, an external person submits a direct deposit form that is as if they're an employee and redirects the direct deposit to their bank account. That has happened and it's not fun. Training, automated training. So this is things like KnowBe4, automated spam and phishing training. That's really good. So use an external party for training that specializes in training and around security awareness. And then do regular training on the things that are specific to your organization. So that information classification, security protocols, and emphasizing the importance and tying the importance of security back to the whole reason that we're doing this work, that we have a care for the people that we are trying to serve, because we don't want the people we serve's information to be out there for future employers, landlords, identity thieves, and the police to be able to Google. For example, I mentioned about like drug and alcohol treatment. That is information that, you know, we have a duty to protect and keep private, and you don't want someone to not get a job because of that. I'm gonna move on quickly. Applying compliance standards is important. For a lot of organizations, this can be things like HIPAA or PCI. I think there's the Center for Information Internet Security has their 20 controls, which are really good and provide a nice comprehensive set of controls that, you know, anyone can go download for free from their website, and are, you know, most IT professionals should be able to apply to their systems and at some level. And that's a nice generalized framework, because HIPAA has specific meanings and doesn't cover all the data, and is, you know, and PCI is the same thing. It's good to have some generalized framework that you apply to your information security. And then for compliance, you know, identify your risks. So understand who and what you're trying to protect, what your data is, select the standards. You want to probably have a spreadsheet for tracking, and then you're assessing and evaluating, implementing, and then mitigating. And then you need to repeat this process, because everything changes every, you know, year or so, or couple years. So you need some repetitive process. Okay, so that's a lot for an hour, and we're 3 minutes past. Are there any other questions that I can answer? Well, if not, I thank everyone for joining me. For BSK grantees, you can, the capacity building funds are available to help implement and assess and do specific projects for your organization. You can either contact your BSK program coordinator, or you can just go to bit.ly/501RFA, submit a request for assistance to 501 Commons, and mention that you're a BSK grantee, and we'll start, we can start you on a process. So thank you, everyone. I appreciate your attendance. Again, this will be posted to the 501 Commons YouTube channel, and I believe the BSK program will also be posting it for later viewing, so you could share. Thank you very much.